Okay, and welcome to Leaders in Conversation. We're going to get started here. Leaders in Conversation is where we explore humanness at work with big-hearted leaders in conversations that build clarity to help solve some of today's business challenges. I'm your host, Ken Blackwell.
And I'm Amanda Cookson. Hello. And hello to everybody who's joining us. We've got around about 200 people, 150 over in Facebook and 50 who've got tickets to join us today live on Zoom. So this week we're exploring the human workplace, and we have our amazing guest, Simone Fenton Jarvis. Simone is Workplace Consultancy Director at REOC. She is passionate about creating people-centric workplaces, and it's that passion that drives not only her role at REOC, but also as a fellow of the Institute of Workplace and Facilities Management, where she's vice chair of the Workspace group. Simone's also a member for the 30% Club. So what I'd like us to do then, before we start with our questions for Simone, is if everybody in the chat could just type in where you're from. And also what we'd love to know is what's been the biggest positive that you've had during lockdown and working from home, and what's been your biggest challenge?
Awesome.
So while everyone is busy doing that, Simone, I'm going to get you started with the first question. So I'm really interested in this phrase, people-centered workplaces. And there's been discussion about human workplace, people-centered workplace, and just workplace in general. And I guess what I'm really interested in is, what is a people-centric workplace? And what tangible differences would I see if I kind of walked into an organization? How would I know that that organization has put people at its heart and center?
Let's use a current example, I guess. And hi, everyone, before I get started. A current example of the COVID-19. So a people-centered workplace wouldn't have panicked when the meters went from 2 meter to 1 meter and worried what all the signage was going to happen. And, you know, now people don't know what they're doing. A people-centric workplace ultimately would have been very much, well, we'll keep it at 2 meters, because just because the legislation says that doesn't mean that's what we have to follow. Let's put our people first, make sure they feel safe and are safe. And it's that difference between doing things for ticking boxes and doing things because it's the right thing to do.
So if we think back a little bit about sort of the history of the workplace and how it was organized, you know, obviously I think there were some safety concerns at first, but what really is the start of this idea of workplace as a thing, something that could actually be studied as opposed to just we're off going to work at this place? What is it that actually has generated this study?
I think as people have evolved, you know, we've gone from being utilities, cogs in the machine, to now driving this sense of wanting engagement and experience. I guess it goes back to the industrial revolution of how we were all working, and now ultimately we're still trying to come out of that habit of going to a place to do work. So it's very ingrained in our history, I guess. As a profession, I guess there's still globally many different ways of defining what workplace is. For me, workplace is all about the process, the technology, and the space, with the people at the centre of that. And very much, you know, you've got your workspace. It becomes a place when there's people there and there's that culture.
And, you know, how has things evolved out of, you know, the sort of hygiene and safety piece to now start to incorporate, as you're saying, like the collaboration piece of this, the interactive piece of this? How is the workplace evolving to incorporate that evolving sense of what work is?
Yeah, I think the workplace, I guess, is evolving from a technology point of view. But I think it's the people that are evolving the most. The technology, some of the technologies that, you know, we're utilising now, they're not new. We were doing them a year ago, but it's using them for the new way. And I think it's because people, you know, the change that would have taken 5 years has happened in 14 weeks. And I think it's people are now more kind of, I guess, resilient and receptive to that change. And I think there's an acceptance that a certain amount of technology and new ways of working are going to be needed to ensure that we're safe. And I think people are just embracing things a little bit more than it was previously, as well as organisations, not just people on the ground.
So some people have talked about, go ahead, Amanda.
No, it was just that, going back many moons ago when I used to work in an office rather than for myself, the whole thing about how it felt was more around culture. And so there was a discussion about the culture of the organisation and whether we were a live plant or a plastic plant organisation, because obviously plants have bugs on them, so plastic is better and you don't need to water them. But I'm just really interested then about, if you're saying workplace is about process, tech and space, where does that culture piece fit into that model?
Yeah, so the people bit, so the people at the centre, the culture bit. And I guess I often get asked what's more important, the space, technology and the process, or the culture. And I guess you only have to look at things like Google, where it has been born out of a garage, to suddenly realise that it's not the place that you work in. We all know now that we're doing a job and we're being effective and productive, most of us. And I guess, I know in my team that we've got a really good culture and this working doesn't feel that different. Whereas some colleagues of, some friends and colleagues and things, it's more around, it feels different for them because they've not got that culture in their team, that there's still that connectedness. So I think it's that culture, it always goes back to that people and having that at the centre of everything. And it shouldn't be a separate part, it should just be embedded in everything.
There are several questions and comments in the chat that I think go to culture. People are talking about the routines, that they were used to, and whether that was, part of the commute that was there, the interactions that folks would have. And I think all of that experience goes to the experience of work. What are you seeing in terms of perhaps a new culture arising out of our current situation that is, maybe going to replace, some of those old patterns, or what are ways in which people are replacing some of those patterns that just can't exist anymore?
Yeah, I guess start with some patterns that are repeating. You can take the whole presenteeism in an office, and now the virtual world is now, we've got this agile guilt where we think that we need to be checking our emails at 10 o'clock at night and working till 10 o'clock at night just to show our colleagues and our managers that we are working because we're at home and they can't see us. And it doesn't mean that the people are being productive. It just means that they're working a lot of hours or logging on every couple of hours to show that they're still there. And this rise of agile guilt has also come through to people that are working. So it's very much, I'm working as much as I can work here, but I must prove that I'm working this much. And a lot of people are struggling with that of how do they step away, and there's all talk of, are we sleeping in the office or are we eating at home? Sleeping in the office or working at home. And it's this kind of blurred lines that's happening. If you've not got a designated space that you can walk out of at 5 o'clock or 9 o'clock, whatever your working pattern is, then people are having this blurred line. I think what hopefully will come from this is people will start to look at how they're working in line with the circadian rhythms and start working when they're productive, not just because the world says that 9 to 5 is the way that everybody should work. I know I'm most productive for innovation, kind of brainstorming activities in the evening, and that's when I do mine. And my colleagues would go, why are you online at that time? And I'm like, well, I had a few hours off in the midday, and I know that I work best in sprints, so that's how I work. So I think it's hopefully from this we will learn them new patterns of behaviour.
Well, and I think that's perhaps one of the cultural pieces that is going to change, right? Because, the 9 to 5 so-called was driven by the fact that, well, in order to interact physically, people need to show up at the same time. Right? Yeah. You can't have somebody showing up at 11 o'clock at night, but their colleagues aren't there, and so as that rhythm changes a bit, and I think what you touched on in terms of metric, right? The whole, how do we measure work now, right? There's been such a focus on hours, right? How many hours are you in the office? Not necessarily you being productive in those hours, but how many hours are you there? Are you seeing ways in which people are now maybe getting a handle on how to measure work when it's not being done by the hours you spend in the office?
Yeah, I think, you can see some bad stories that have come out of this where certain companies are tracking how long their employees were online. And we've seen a few funny situations where people have actually fastened their mouse to objects that are moving, then their screen doesn't freeze. And you just think there's something fundamentally wrong if that is the extremes that people are going to. And I think from that, it's almost a if we look at what work is and how we measure it, it should be on output, not on hours. And I think, I could spend 60 hours doing one thing and say this is what I've done, or I could do 60 things in 3 hours. It shouldn't matter. I think it's that measuring the value of what you're doing. And I think there's a big difference between knowledge workers and task workers. And I think it's so kind of not one size fits all. And I know we get obsessed with a little bit about measuring productivity and ultimately, what does that productivity measure look like? And I think that is still quite difficult to measure. But I think what we should be focusing on is measuring output of the organisation. And if the organisation needs to dig a little bit deeper and drive a little bit more business, then that's when we need to engage our people to dig deeper, I guess. And ultimately, engaged people dig deeper anyway. So it's kind of a win-win all around.
It's so interesting because I'm thinking about, as I was putting together the sort of marketing for this event, I Googled dreary office, and all these images came up that reminded me of some of the rather unfortunate jobs and spaces that I've had to work in. And actually, I can see why. I think it's like 65% of the British workforce don't want to go back to the office. And I think if the space that you're going to work in is really uninspiring, I can see why they don't want to do that. So, but then again, I think what people are saying as well is that they're missing that ability to connect and to be creative with others, and sort of looking through, the chat about, what have people found really hard, and what are they missing? It's that sort of human connection. So in this, I guess in this shape of where we're moving to and what is ideal, what's your kind of thinking, and what are you recommending as you're talking to people?
I'm telling people to be human, surprisingly enough. I'm doing the whole, the conversations that you would have had at the coffee machine, the water cooler, still do them, but try and get that almost open time to do it. So one thing that I've trialed with my team is having certain blocks on our diary when we're kind of free, of having a team session set in the diary that is a virtual office. And people can dip in and out of it as and when they wish. And it is the equivalent of coming from a meeting, sitting down for half an hour and going back to a meeting. And it's that almost having somebody in the background that you can communicate with, but not from a specific, a specific reason, because we're seeing a lot of diarised meetings, and it's that accidental learning and accidental bumping into people and relationship building that people are missing. So I think we've got to put some kind of structure in that still happens. And I think when we can get to a point of understanding how people are working, how organisations are going to function in the future, that's when we can get to a point of saying, how do we get that time still? Because it is important, especially, people that are new to organisations. Imagine being onboarded in a new organisation during this situation where you can't just go and speak to people. We need to create spaces for them people to build relationships. And I think that's where the virtual world, you see some really good tech like Workplace by Facebook, for instance. And, we've got our own as well that is a similar feel of like a Facebooky feel, just to build that kind of relationships with people. And I think that's where technology can really start to kind of bring people together, like it has done over the last 3 months.
So if you think about people working from home, let me just see if I can find who it was in the chat, because people have put so many suggestions in there about, what they've loved and what they found really difficult. And as I'm sort of scrolling to find it, somebody said that they're really struggling to get that separation between work and home. And so kind of working from home has meant that they feel like they're living at work. So
that was Karen who shared that.
Thank you, Ken. So Simone, do you have any advice for how you can create separation or a better home working space?
Have a designated space. I think sitting on the sofa with your laptop on your knee and then expecting to put your laptop down and then have your normal life once you put your laptop down, that's not going to work. You need to, almost goes back to that whole thing, change your space, change your culture, and it's that it has to feel different. I've seen people go for a walk in the morning, walk back into the house and start work. I've seen people walk out of the house at the end of their day to leave work and then come back in again. I think packing away your work equipment is quite crucial if you've not got a designated space. Don't just be kind of leaving your laptop open with all your paper and stuff around it. You know, move it to one side and out of sight, out of mind almost. Make your spaces feel different in any way possible. We've seen people put things like bookcases to divide rooms up, for instance. Then they've got a part that is a work, and it's not, you know, there's no reason for us to go to expensive quick fixes if this is not going to be a long-term thing. I think we will see a rise of companies looking at how do we give people an office environment in their homes. A couple of companies are looking at like garden offices, for instance, providing them to their staff because they want people to have that separation, I guess, between home and life. So just as much physical change and be disciplined. You know, try and set your time to make sure that you are not just sitting because you feel like you're at home and you can't just switch off. You need to almost set these are the tasks that I'm going to be doing, and when I finish that task, I'm gonna leave for the day, and then you go downstairs.
Well, I remember a story. A colleague of mine, quite a bit older, was used to commuting down to Center City, Philadelphia, every day. It was about an hour ride on the train, 45 minutes. Worked for a big accounting firm, and then he started his own company. And when he did, he was working from home. And this is 25, 30 years ago. He started to feel agitated, and he couldn't figure out why. And he finally realized that what he was missing in his daily routine was his commute. He would spend that 45 minutes on the train reading the paper, meditating, just kind of getting, himself in place, getting prepared for work on the way there and decompressing on the way back. So what he chose to do and experiment was to go to his recliner on his living room, and he would sit there for 45 minutes in the morning, read the morning paper, and then get up and go to work. And then in the evening, before dinner, would go and sit on the chair for another 45 minutes. And that routine gave him that separation, gave him that mental space that you were talking about, just like people going outside to separate work from home, right? And to have that transitory period.
Yeah. And that headspace is important. I mean, I found yesterday I did my first official workplace visit since the pandemic, and having a 3-hour drive to the place, a 3-hour drive home, I felt fine when I got home. I felt much better because I'd had that space. I'd seen the actual outside for more than an hour. And I guess having that, I was able to put my podcast on, listen to music, and it's not something that throughout the pandemic I've really been doing, which is weird for me because I'm quite into my podcasts. And I think it's just because I've been working at home, I just not really put them on. And I think getting them habits back to signal, this is my kind of free time to do the reflection. And, even the 5 minutes that you would usually have from traveling between meetings or, from one thing to the next, we're missing as well because our diary is just getting back to back. I think that's that human workplace bit is we do need that 5 minutes to just do simple things like reflect and even go to the toilet and get a drink. Like you can't just be a robot and expect, your working day is 8 hours, therefore you need to do 8 1-hour meetings. It just doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So, because if I just because some of the clients that I've talked to during this period, some of them have been really lucky and they've had a separate room and a separate space. And so it's been quite easy for them to find that separation. Other people are working on the kitchen table whilst holding on to their 2-year-old. I've spoken to somebody in a cupboard with their laundry basket behind them. I've been taken into the bedroom because their kind of flatmates are too noisy. It's been kind of chaotic, but I can see how taking time out and going outside and then coming in is really helpful. And I like that idea of giving yourself a break, a reflection break, because I think that sort of Zoom fatigue and going from one thing to another thing makes a lot of sense. I'm really interested in your view, in terms of that process technology space, that quite a few companies that I work with, they had teams where, for the nature of the work that team did, the view of the leadership was that team could never and would never be able to work from home because it wasn't appropriate, there wasn't the security, there wasn't the systems there. And so there were people who were kind of really desperate to work from home and have that flexibility, and they were told no. So I'm really interested in what your view is about that coming back in to the workspace and what that flexible look will be, because I think the latest research paper that I've seen has said that less than 25% of the workforce have a flexible working package. And so there's real anxiety that you're going to go from all at home to all at work. And I think people are craving to have choice.
It's the choice bit is crucial. I think when we all got kind of sent home from the office, I think people imagine this, coming back to the office with a red ribbon and being welcomed back en masse. We obviously know that that's not going to happen now. And I think it's a case of not got choice over something. You feel like it's being done to you rather than with you. The brain just doesn't like that, obviously. So it's a case of how do we allow people flexibility and to be human. You see people booking half days to go for a half an hour dentist appointment. That's just ridiculous. Like, that shouldn't be happening these days. And I think the people that want to go back to the workplace are the ones where they've had very different experiences. So people that may have been homeschooling, kids around their ankles, not got an official workplace set up in their homes. The people that have got maybe poor connectivity, they've had a very different experience from somebody that has had their home, has been able to just kind of enjoy not commuting, go for plenty of walks, have time to empty the dishwasher, all these experiences that people are saying. And I think trying to compare we can't say that this has been a normal kind of remote working situation because we had to do it. It was done very quickly overnight. And I think all them people that ran out of the office with a second screen in their hands, thinking this is all I need for the next kind of 3 months or 3 weeks at the time, it was too kind of off the cuff. And I think is what we know now is we need to really capture what's worked and what hasn't worked throughout this period. And findings and the feelings of the people within the organisations to start looking at what the future workplace strategy is. There's a crucial thing here of what is the workplace for. And I think we really need to understand that on a really business, individual business level, because if we don't know what the workplace is for, then there's an argument of, well, why have we got it? And if people don't want to go back to the workplace, we need to ask what the workplace was being used for. Because for me, the workplace should be this destination that people want to go to. It shouldn't be a place where people have to go to 9 to 5. And I think if we get the workplace right, it should be this buzz atmosphere that you walk into, and your purpose, you've got that connectedness, you've got that belonging. You know that you can grab a good coffee with a colleague and sit down and really start working on a project and like innovation and really get that kind of what the office should be for. The office isn't to go into 9 to 5 and stick your headphones on and hope that nobody distracts you for the next 3 hours because you've got a report to do. That should be being done at home. And I think that's what, from the back of this, many organisations need to look at how their work styles and how their management is affecting the work styles. So when you've got the organisations that say, no, we could never work from home, it just wouldn't work. When you look deeper and you dig deeper and you ask why 5 times, they don't trust their people. And that's what it always goes back to. It's not, it can't be done because technology can allow most kind of knowledge worker jobs to be done. It always goes back to trust. You see things like, I want to be able to just walk up to somebody in the office. I want to be able to see what they're doing. And that's where the presenteeism then comes in as well, because people know that they are being watched.
Interesting. So let me just repeat back then what I've heard you say. The key thing, because I know that there are some people on the call whose responsibility is about managing that, coming back to work and re-envisioning what that workplace looks like. So what you're saying is you need to think about what is our workplace for? And in answering that question, that will then give clarity about whether people need to be present, physically in the building, or whether there is the ability to then have that flexibility or that hybrid model. And I just want to pick up sort of what Mark has said in the chat, that this is Mark Gannon, who said that he thinks the genie's now out of the bottle, especially for those that have never worked like this before, but now see all the positives, and he can't see how there will be a return to normal for our employees.
Yeah, I think there shouldn't be a return to normal, because how we was working was fundamentally broken. You look at the GP of all of the organisations, you look at the well-being, the sickness rates, you look at the climate impacts. You know, why are we all jumping on and squeezing onto a tube, and definitely no social distancing in place on the tube? So why are we doing that when actually we could just go into the office an hour later in a quiet period and spread out that kind of elongated working day to really start? You know, nobody likes the commute in rush hour, so why do we keep doing it to ourselves? And I think that's, you know, if companies find themselves going back to normal, I would really recommend them taking a step back and assessing what they're doing and getting some external help where they need it as well. Because sometimes you need somebody to hold the mirror up to you. I do. So it's the kind of, you know, be open to that, to be told that you're doing something probably when it could be improved.
Well, and it seems like we're, you know, suffering the combination of several systems that have just been, you know, building one on top of each another organically, not programmatically, and not to our benefit. You know, I know here in North America, in the US, there's a lot of talk about reopening and people going back to business, but one of the linchpins of that is childcare. You know, with those folks with young children, they just can't, you know, abandon their kids at home and go off to the workplace. They need to have daycare. Well, if daycare isn't open, then, you know, you can't go back to work. And it's daycare and it's school and the timings of those that intersect with people going to work, having hours. You know, I know when my daughter was young, many years ago, you know, having to time out. So, okay, who's going to drop off? Who's going to pick up? You know, and working your day around those systems. So we're almost trapped by some structures here, or have been. Right. So it seems like breaking out of those, now that we have some choice, would be really critical, and having some principles to guide, you know, those choices would be really good. And I like the idea of going back to that question of, so what's the workplace for? I think what could help answer that, and maybe you can help us with some ideas here, is what are some principles? And I think you've maybe said them before, but maybe just to pull them together a bit. So what are some principles that we need to hold as things that we're striving for in reimagining, redefining what the workplace is?
I think defining the purpose of the organisation, what is it that you're even employing people to do, obviously then ties into why would you need them in a physical space or a virtual space. I think the aspect of, to get to almost a bit of a code, what you want from your people, and what almost we've done this for you and you need to do this by working for the organisation. It has to be a very adult relationship. I think far too many times we see, this is it, here another HR policy, you must follow this, otherwise you know where you're going to be. And I think it's actually, we need to start holding companies accountable for what they're doing for the employees, because otherwise it ends up with people jumping on Glassdoor, leaving a poor review, nothing ever changing, and it always comes down to, oh, the employee must have been a disgruntled employee. Ignore that. And I see it far too often. I think if someone can't give open feedback and they're going on a public site to do so, the equivalent of us, you know, doing a TripAdvisor, I think that's that element of bringing that trust and empowerment into the workforce, that they do have a say over what is happening. Work isn't being done to them. People have a choice to work for that organisation. And I do think from the back of all of this, there's going to be so many people reflecting on, is this the right organisation for me? Because they're not happy with, you know, being told to come back to the workplace and come back to normal when they know it's not safe. And you look at, I guess, the lower paid workers as well, people like cleaners, you know, they're being forced back to situations and asked to clean, then it's safe for other people to return. There's just something not okay. It's not sitting right with me. I think we don't need to rush back. There may be some companies, and I know from the economy point of view, I said, but we still need to balance that with looking after people. And I think that future workplace needs to be that people-centric workplace. And you can only get that from defining what your purpose is, defining why people want to work for you. And I think when you've got that right, if you've got a certain skill set and a certain demographic in your workplace, it may be that I don't think there can ever be a webinar without saying millennials, so I'll say millennials. I guess you can say, right, what does a millennial want from the workplace? And you can start not pigeonholing, but there's definitely some correlations of certain aspects that people want. And everybody wants flexibility, so it's not about millennial wanting flexibility. Everybody wants flexibility when they know how they can do it. But there's certain things, it might be the latest technology that millennials are more into compared to someone else. And just kind of putting that blanket approach to, if we know we need to attract a certain person or demographic to the workplace, what do we have to do to attract them to it? I think so many times it's been, this is what the organisation is, this is what we stand for, and people just should want to come and work for us. What's the problem? Like, why can't we recruit people? And actually, I think we need to start looking out the box a little bit more and look at, from an equality and diversity point of view, why have we got such imbalance in organisations? What bit are we missing?
Excellent.
That's really, it's just so interesting, because I'm just looking then in terms of equality and diversity, picking up on that. I think there's a question here from Fergus, which is kind of a bit left field for me indeed, but I feel it's really important, and that's about people who have families and children. So I've got a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old, and I can hear in the background, I don't know whether you can hear, that they've decided it'd be great fun to start playing with bells and wind the dog up. And so sometimes when you're working from home and when you're working in this new flexible way, that intrusion on family is really hard. And so how can you embrace all of the needs that people have? Because I think that in this time of crisis and everyone kind of mucking in together, we've been extra specially accommodating, and so we've been supportive of people in their different circumstances. But I know when I worked in corporate, actually people were expected to arrive at a certain time, and if that interfered with drop-off or nursery, that was their problem to resolve. When their children were sick, that was frowned upon, because you're supposed to be at work. And so how do you embrace all of the needs and all of the things that we have that make us human into a workspace, so it meets everyone's needs, not just the people that we traditionally think about as needing to accommodate within D?
Yeah. I think it's about having a level of compassion and empathy. I've loved having the kind of calls where you see kids running around in the background and come and sit, and they want to, because it's normal, it's human. And I think it breaks barriers down. I think there's been a much more kind of increase in personal relationships building, because you have seen what's on someone's bookshelf behind them. You have seen the dog barking in the background. I think it's this kind of like, we're all human, we're all normal, so why are we pretending that we're robots just because we're in a corporate world and we must be here 9 to 5 with our shirts on and our ties, and yes, this is what we must do. We need to rebel against that kind of mindset. It needs to be very kind of have a level of compassion for people, and understanding. I guess it does link straight back to the inclusivity and diversity. Everybody's different, and my normal's not your normal. And I think the quicker we all start appreciating that and embracing the difference, then that's definitely the way forward. And for me, it does start in the workplace, because you get a diverse workplace, and it does go into society.
Well, and there were some comments earlier about one of the downsides of virtual being that you miss some of the chance encounters. Rob had a comment about it's one of the things that's difficult in the virtual world. And yet, as you're just saying, we're now getting a window into people's lives, into their world. You're seeing a little bit of their personality sometimes in the spaces that they're in. It's a window that has just never been opened before, right? That people come to work with these facades and these images of who they are. And now suddenly, we're getting to see something of their home world, maybe for good or for bad. What do you think the impact of that window is, and making people a bit more human and a bit more relatable, perhaps, to the future of work? Like, is this going to be something that is sustainable and can carry through, or is this going to be something that's a pandemic function and going to go away later on?
I think the people that have seen the benefit of it, and are in that kind of habit of, and seeing the benefit and the habit of doing it and being that person, then I think and hope that they will continue doing it. I think it's allowed different conversations to happen. That kind of, did you have a good weekend? Yes, I did. How was your weekend? Yeah, it was good, thanks. Straight to business. Whereas actually, on the flip side now, I was on a call on Friday, and my boss was showing me a big, massive playhouse that his wife had purchased for the kids, and he had to build it. And he was showing us all the pieces of wood and the fact that there was 500 screws, and we was obviously enjoying and laughing at the fact that this is what his weekend was going to consist of. So Monday morning, it was very much like, how did the playhouse go? And it's a different conversation. It's human, and I think for me, I'm in a sales role, and it's people buy from people. So I think it's going to impact my world quite a lot, because we've had an opening into someone's lives, and we've now got a connection. It's not this kind of commodity that you're buying off the shelf, you buy into the person. And I think that's where businesses should take kind of note of that, and really kind of pushing that human feel to their selling tactics, because cold calling should have died a while ago. And I think, let's get people building relationships with people instead. You buy from people you trust, ultimately. So let's start building that instead.
I think leadership is like sales as well, because you're selling ideas, you're selling a vision, and you're getting people to give or spend their time, their energy and their commitment. I wonder if we could just pivot the conversation a little bit, because I think it's Melissa. I've just got a M at the moment, or it could be Melanie, apologies. She has said, I think we have to really understand what the return to work means. She doesn't want to return back to the old workplace, but what she really likes and what she's noticed is that in the past, there was this kind of colossal waste of resources. And she's kind of saying, the lights were on all the time, the spaces were only being used 25% of the time, and she's kind of talking in the US here about climate control, landscapers, and all those things, as well as the commute, that's been really damaging for the environment. And so part of lockdown has been all those lovely stories about how, the ozone is healing, rivers are getting cleaner, and I guess putting ideal workplace culture aside, wouldn't it be great if the way that we worked and the way that we got our commerce as a society was also done in a sustainable way with the environment? And do you have an idea or some guidance, I guess, for the people who are with us about if they wanted to move forward with their workforce and use their spaces in a way that was as friendly to the environment as possible, what would that look like?
Collect data, because if you're not basing decisions on data, it's an opinion. And I think the more data that you can get around the IoT and the building management systems, when we do occupancy studies with organisations, and they either say, oh, we've got too much room or we've not got enough room. When you look at the average kind of space utilisation coming out at 46%, you think, oh, that means there's 54% of the office that's not being used, which is being lit and heated and managed. Why we've got all this space? And I guess looking deeper into it, then you've got your why do people come, and if things like proposals, we're going to have to double the workspace because we now need to socially distance. Well, actually, no, we don't, because there's 54% of the workplace that's actually not being used anyway. To get the data of how your spaces are being used, how people feel about them spaces, and get to that utopia position that your spaces are very much on a supply and demand. So that you could think of a restaurant in your head where that you have to book 3 weeks in advance. And you can think of ones where that if you've just decided to go out, you can just walk in there and it's fine. There'll always be spaces. The workplace needs to be the supply and demand. It needs to be very much, we know that on a Monday there's X amount of meeting rooms that will be needed. Therefore, let's make the meeting rooms available. It stops people from booking 3-4 weeks in advance and then not turning up. It stops people from walking into the office and going, oh, I need to catch up with that person, but there's not a meeting room. Therefore, I'll have to wait till next week. That's slowing down of organisations and decisions. Be more agile, and the space needs to facilitate that by doing that kind of get the data around, There's temperature sensors, there's light sensors, humidity, noise, occupancy. Bring all of these kind of things into your spaces. Even, you know, a system that we use where instead of just looking at how the meeting room's used, actually map how the technology is being used. So what technology is being used in that meeting room? Because then you can start defining of, we need more meeting rooms, but what technology goes into them meeting rooms? It might not be any, it might just be that people want a space to gather. And also the collaboration spaces. You know, how many times do you see a 4-6 person booth with 1 or 2 people sat in it? Well, actually that suggests to me that you need more 1 or 2 people areas, not wasting the space with 2 people sat in an area. And I think when you know how things are being used and it's not just an opinion, and you've got that core data that you can go back to your CFO with that says, this is why we need to do what we do, you get a lot more buy-in. Your workplaces are run much better. And yeah, it's weighing up the benefits of having too much space compared to too little. And I think it's really crucial at the moment that people don't make rash decisions around, you know, start kind of getting rid of some spaces. I think that we really need to get back to some kind of pattern of working first by collecting the feedback from the people and then reassessing over the next kind of 6 to 9 months what people need. There's no point in start rationalising estates now when you really don't know what your people want to work like in the future.
Well, and it seems like there's 2 key aspects to what you were just talking about. And the first is intentionality. There needs to be some thoughtful thinking. Boy, that was deep, right? Some thoughtful thinking about what the nature of work needs to be, right? Like you're saying, like, what do we really need here? And the co-piece of that then is questioning assumptions, right? Like you're saying, like, don't instantly assume, well, we need to double the space because we have, you know, double the meetings. Well, no, maybe there's another way to do this, right? So combining both intentionality and questioning assumptions about the nature of work might then allow us to get there. And, you know, you're talking about some things which I think are ongoing battles, and maybe we can get your opinions on some of these, you know, like, you know, open space or open plans versus closed plans. You know, is there a good way there? I'm dying to know.
Yeah, I think, you know, open plan offices have been absolutely up over the years. I kind of feel sorry for them. It's not the open plan office that's the problem. It's how people are using the space. The space has not been designed for how the people want to use a space. Open plan is fine if it is being used in the right way. If it's you want to go to an open plan office and concentrate, that's not going to happen. We know that doesn't work. There's a time and a place to do each kind of work task and each setting. And I think from, you know, how I always talk is, you know, use the 4 C's: where you're going to collaborate, where you're going to communicate, where you're going to concentrate, and where you're going to contemplate. And I think, you know, when we were saying about the train journey and commuting earlier, my contemplation time, it generally happened while I've been traveling. And I think it's that bit that I've missed. And I think, right, well, when I kind of come out of this, how am I going to get each bit of that aspect back? I think by using that, and I guess the other thing is around, I also, you know, the conscious workplace, engage your people, enable them and involve them. And I think that kind of, that if you have to kind of come up with your kind of company mantra that is right for your culture and organisation and your kind of, you know, these strategic kind of aims, but ask the people why they was attracted to your company, and ask them, you know, so yeah, you saw this big shiny thing and you came to work for our company. How has it paid off? Is the reason you joined the company 2 years ago still relevant today? Or is it something where you've gone, well, actually, it was just a marketing company isn't like this at all? And get on. Don't be scared of asking questions. I think it's. I mean, Brene Brown. If you've not kind of anybody that's not read any of her stuff, it's awesome. But you know, the whole, you know, brave leaders ask difficult questions. Be daring and ask difficult questions. And if you're scared of the answer, you should probably definitely ask that question, because there's something to find out.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, jump
sorry, I had this conversation way before lockdown with kind of a coach and a visionary who's a little bit out there. And she was saying to me, Amanda, what we need is to change the way that workspace is used. and that people don't come to the office to sit and do their work. They come to the office to practice mindfulness, to do that creative work, and they go away to do their quiet work. And I'm just wondering, what would the office, what would the world be like? What would our world of work be like? And what would engagement be like if we took, like, the rule book, threw it away, and we just literally focused on what we had in our spaces around those 4 C's? So you talked about collaborate, contemplate, create, communicate. Do you have kind of your dream vision of what the most ideal, awesome workplace would be?
Yeah, I think I do. Yeah, I think it's a lot of the collaboration spaces. I can almost see a mix of, for me, I know I work for a technology company, but there's a time and a place for technology. Sometimes you can't just be picking a pen up and some Post-it notes. And I think getting very hands-on in that way, I think that's where the workplace, you should have a mix of them kind of spaces, the technology, interactive whiteboards, the kind of technology that means people can be working virtually, the people in the office, and still feel part of the meeting. Far too many times, home workers are just seeing silhouettes in the office, so they can't hear anything, definitely can't say anything because they can't get a word in edgeways. And it's this kind of, the utopia for me is it's got to hit all of these kind of crucial elements. And anybody that's not kind of had a read of Neil Usher, The Elemental Workplace, really gets them 12 elements of the workplace, the choice, the creativity, having the space, the storage, even down to, are the toilets right in that organisation? Because they are pretty important, it turns out, when people are coming back with feedback. You avoid a pub because the toilets aren't nice. Well, it's going to be like that with workplaces. And I think, it's this kind of getting back to the basic human needs, right, even down to, hierarchy of needs. Let's start hitting them needs through the workplace. And, for different organisations, that will look different. I'm very against organisations that head on Pinterest and say, create me a workplace like this, because they all look the same. And that's not how a workplace should be. You should be able to walk into a workplace and feel the culture of that workplace by truly walking in. It's not about how many beanbags and tennis tables are there and here's a slide. These are just kind of, I guess, signs of a culture, but the true culture comes from the people and the behaviours every single day.
There was a question from Fergus, which I've got an eye on the time, but Fergus asked about whether there was any issues kind of psychologically about just kind of working. Oh, here we go, I found it. So does anyone think there are societal and psychological dangers in working remotely over long periods of time? Taking to extremes, could we lose sight of what's decided when and where and by whom, and reduce our ability for natural interaction?
Yeah, I think there's definitely risks of kind of the social isolation. I think particularly for people that may live alone, and they like that kind of, like we're saying, the structure and the purpose in the day. If anybody has got kind of a mental health issue as well as a standalone, and they get up in the morning and they're left with their own thoughts all day, they're at danger of going in a certain cycle, I guess, and they need people to pick them back up and support them and know that they have got someone with them to be supportive, and they're not alone in everything that they're facing. And I think this is where the workplace becomes increasingly important, and why well-being has been massive over the last few years, because we see the rise in isolation and loneliness and mental health problems, and actually the workplace could fix some of these. And I think it starts with that choice. If you're having such a bad day that you really can't go to an office, then you should be able to just stay at home. If you think, I feel a bit groggy today, but where do I fancy working? Actually, I'll go into the office because I know I've got my mate that'll cheer me up. And I think it needs to come down to that human level of you're making that choice, not just ringing in sick and coughing down the phone hoping that HR believe you. And I think that's what we need to come away from. So I think there's definite risks. I think that's where we need balance. And I guess we could take the whole keeping in touch days that people on maternity take. It's how do we say to people, well, yes, you've got a choice, but as part of this choice, we would like you in the office a couple of days a month, because we we do value that time seeing you face to face in the whites of your eyes. And there's certain conversations that you want to happen face to face in an office. Certain difficult HR conversations, they are very difficult over Teams. So it does need to, there's a time and a place for getting in the whites of people's eyes. And also, I could sit here and say, I'm absolutely fine today. If you saw me face to face, you might go, she's not fine. And I think it's getting that kind of feeling off people as well that's going to be really important. Build trust.
So Simone, if someone wanted to undertake the journey here, right, of starting down this path of making a more engaging workplace, and this might have two facets to it. It might be, when we get back to a collective physical workplace, but also, our home workplace. Where would you encourage people to start? What would be a good first step for them in creating a more engaging, just more human workplace for themselves? And that might include also some creature comforts too, like, if you've got some recommendations about chairs, desks, standing desk, sitting desk, any of those things that can make the whole experience a bit better too, that would be great.
Yeah, so I think to start with, I guess, asking people what their current thoughts are, get that baseline, and then work to improve it from there. I think it's a case of looking at what the trends are of people's feedback, seeing the impact of, if you said, right, I give my workplace a score out of 7 out of 10, but if you change X, Y, and Z, it'd be a 9 out of 10. If you can start capturing that kind of information across the board and start gradually increasing that workplace for the people, then that's where it'll be a benefit. I think the creature comforts is important, and I know, from a hot desking kind of world, and it badly in many organisations of, turn up, sit where you want, and that dreaded moment when you arrive at the office and there's not a desk anywhere, or someone that you want to meet and they've got not any spare desks around them. That needs to be a thing of the past, because we're human creatures. We want to know, we don't like uncertainty, and we want to know that we've got a belonging. And I think that's where, again, the technology comes in. Things like a desk booking system. If you could book a desk and I go, right, I know that tomorrow I want to work with Amanda in London, I could go there and go, is Amanda in London tomorrow? Yes. Okay, I want to book a desk near Amanda. I know then that when I arrive, I've booked a locker. I've got somewhere to put all my stuff, my gym kit and my bikes. I've just cycled in. I've got somewhere to put my stuff. I go and sit next to Amanda, and I do the work that I went to the office for, to do that collaboration bit. And I think that kind of the personal touches where that comes in then is knowing that you've got that safety of having somewhere to put your stuff. You're not kind of just leaving your bag or you go into a meeting room. And you've got, I wouldn't go to the extremes of you need pictures of your dogs, cats and tortoises on your desk. I think that's probably a little bit too far. But I think you've got to make, if it's your home workspace, make it as personalised as you like. I've got a postcard here that my friend sent me second week into lockdown. And I think it's nice little things like that. I wouldn't take it into work and put it on my desk if I had a desk, but I'm working at home and it feels like it's part of what I'm doing. Small things, let people have plants. Yes, it's a small thing, but it's a nice thing for the office. There's a lot of benefits to having plants in the office, but let people choose what plant they want in their kind of desking area they would sit in, or, it's different things for different organisations, but give people choice over how they're working, where they're working, and when, and you'll see a definite decrease in the amount of personalisation on people's desks, would be my point. Because people personalisations on desks when they're clinging for belonging, and actually the belonging should be to the organisation, not to the desk in a building.
Interesting. I'm now running through my head is every cubicle of every client I've ever sat with, and how many pictures were on the walls, how much of their personal paraphernalia was jammed in their office, and now trying to wonder like, wow, what the impact of them and their connection to their organization was. Okay, you'll have to think about. So the time has flown by. Thank you, Simone. That was amazing.
Oh, thank you.
It was brilliant.
No,
really
enjoyed it.
Great to have you with us this week. So let us go to what's coming up next week. So thank you again for being here this week. By the way, if you want to get in touch with Simone, You can do so. You can check out her blog, which is workvibeblog.wordpress.com. You can also find her on Twitter at Chief Workplace. So Chief, like Chief in charge, Chief Workplace. So thank you for being with us. And next week on episode 5, we have Vimla Apado, who's going to be joining us. Vimla is a design thinker, international speaker, and advocate for changing the way businesses think using technology, design, and culture to align profit and purpose. She works across large-scale organizations, small businesses, and scaling startups, bridging the gap between the public and private sector. And she is going to be talking to us more focused on what? Amanda, how would you say what would be the best way to capture next week's topic?
So Vimla's really passionate about inclusion and about culture. And so her whole thinking and work is about how you use digital to create that space and that culture. So it's going to be another really interesting conversation.
Yeah, I think that's going to intersect really nicely with our conversation today. So you can, of course, find us on Zoom by getting some tickets to Eventbrite. You can also find us in the Leaders in Conversation group on Facebook, where you might be watching us right now. If you just join us on Zoom, it's much easier for us to include your comments and questions. So thank you again. If you'd like to get in touch with Amanda or I, you can do so at the information on your screen. Thank you again, Simone, and thank you all to our audience for being with us today on our 4th episode of Leaders in Conversation.
Thank you. We needed another hour.
Yeah, I would think we do.
Yeah.